Okay, colleagues, I've been asked to give the feedback on behalf of the Health and Safety Committee, which I'm going to do now. But for me to provide you with the detail of the work undertaken by the committee since Conference 2019, I will take up most of the afternoon, without a doubt. But I'm trying to restrict this down to about 10 minutes because we've just had lunch and no doubt everybody's going to go to sleep very soon. And as the Chair said, you will have an opportunity afterwards to ask questions during the tea break and everything else, or you can email myself or the committee if you've got any questions that you want the answers to. Conference 2019 seems many years ago. And on behalf of you and the members and the POA Health and Safety Committee have been working tirelessly throughout this, as you can imagine. And there was a whole list in here of the stuff that we've been doing. I don't want to bore you with a whole list of stuff because it's absolutely meaningless. So I'm going to speak about some of the bigger concerns that we've had and that we've been arguing on your behalf when we're speaking with HMPPS. And the first one I want to raise is fire and the fire contingencies and everything else. Maybe a year ago, 18 months or just before lockdown actually, we sent notices out about fire contingency exercises. HMPPS committed that every single establishment will do they'll look at their fire contingencies and everything else, but they will run a live fire contingency involving the fire services and everybody else at a worst case scenario. And then those results would highlight any findings that they have and issues that would be revealed from that point. Unfortunately, they seem to think that worst case scenario in most establishments is during the daytime when we have maximum staff on duty and all our prisoners are in patrol state or something of that nature. Not only did they commit that they would do this, but they committed that they would involve you guys as well within this. So every local branch committee should have been involved within those contingency exercises and the planning for it. The reason why we raise this is because we see that one of the worst case scenarios in a majority of establishments in England and Wales, possibly Scotland and also Northern Ireland, is at night. Because this is when we are at our lowest staffing levels. Now, most establishments like mine, Cat Bs, Cat Cs, and everything else, and that, no doubt you are also sending out hospital escorts and short notice escorts before your nights, and so your night crew are being depleted on a regular basis. It was particularly prevalent in my establishment where I work. So I would turn up as the night orderly officer and find out I've lost 2 of my night staff out of 4 that have now gone out to a hospital because they're having to take a prisoner who's self-harmed or in need of emergency medical care. Now, the whole point of this is the reason why we were driving this is because at that point was my establishment at risk. And fire is a very real risk within our establishments, or they were at that time. And it hasn't disappeared, it hasn't gone away. Fire is still a major risk to life and our establishments. So we kept pushing this, saying, you know, you've got to do these contingency exercises, because we believe, the NEC believe, that our establishments are under-resourced during the night periods. And our governors and HMPPS are going through their life with their crossed fingers and crossed legs in the hope that nothing really serious happens in one of our establishments. But on behalf of the prison board, they did commit to doing these reviews, and the Health and Safety Whitley meetings, which we attend, they committed to it. They didn't really have a choice. At that point, it was down minuted. There's records of our concerns, and of course, they had to do something about it. So allegedly, they did all these contingency exercises, and amazingly, I think only 3 establishments were identified as requiring possible additional staff resourcing. Only 3. Do you believe that? Because we didn't, and I didn't, and everything else. Out of those 3 establishments, we asked the question, how many have actually received additional resourcing during the nights? Not one of them. Not one of them. So your prisons are running dangerously during the night states. That's what it says to us and everything else. So we raised this and we're still pushing it. And I'm imploring you, when you go back to your branches, you need to speak to your governors And you need to find out when the last fire contingency, live fire contingency, was conducted in your establishment. Guarantee this much, 90% of you will come back and say it was during the daytime, during the core day, during the core working week. Not our weekend, and not during the night state when we're at our weakest. This will have been done when you've got loads of staff around that your orderly officers and your duty governors can deploy to make it and seem to be safe. You should be demanding that these contingencies are run worst case scenario at night when you've got depleted night crew or whatever, and that's when it should be run. And if it is shown that your resourcing is poor, then you need to get up and you need to start challenging your governor under health and safety that it now needs to be correctly resourced. We sent a circular out asking everybody, has this been done? Are you satisfied with it and everything else? And I think we got maybe about a dozen replies from every establishment in total. The reason why, and I'll be honest with you, when I was branch chair at my branch sort of stuff, we were poor on our returns as well. So I recognise how difficult it is. But since being on the NEC, I now recognise the reason why we're getting these requests is the importance that we need this information when we sit down with HMPPS and discuss the issues that we have with them. Another thing that we've been going on about and pushing is first aid. The first aid policy and the compliance with the first aid policy that we currently have in place. And everything else. Do you know what? I went round with Joe and some of the other NEC members, Jackie and that, doing the health and safety inspections and that, and one of the things that we were looking at was the first aid requirements and whether establishments are compliant. In nearly all cases, the establishments were found not to be compliant with the first aid policy. It was a difficult policy and some of it was realistic, and with HMPPS, we've recognised that some of it was unrealistic. They've now gone back. We're in the process of negotiating a new first aid policy. It's been brought out. There is a pilot running in HMP Swellside to tell us whether that is going to be suitable or not. But first aid is a health and safety requirement. The employer is required to have sufficient trained first aid members of staff to protect you people, all right? The staff, the officers, the prison staff, not the prisoners, it's the prison staff. Health and Safety at Work Act requires that the requirement is to protect work staff. They need a separate policy to protect the prisoners. What they're trying to do is combine them both into one policy. Joe is very adamant on this every time we sit down, and he's saying, no, you must have two separate policies. But as I say, it's currently through negotiations at this time. I imagine soon we'll be sending out another circular to you asking for more information as to your first aid facilities in your sites. Uniform, this is a good one. Uniform, the previous contract for our uniform being made in China and everything else, and that came up, the contract came to an end. They then had to negotiate another uniform contract supplier. They've now done that through a company called Canine. And this company not only provide us with uniform and everything else, but the police and some other forces, their uniforms as well. Part of that was some new footwear. So they've now improved and we've got a new standard of footwear that has been out. It should start, some of your members should start getting that footwear if depending how many how much are still in stock of particular sizes. Bearing in mind that when one contract comes to an end and another one starts, they've got a warehouse full of black and white uniform and boots and shoes and everything else within that. Those stocks have been paid for and they have to be depleted before the new stuff comes through. One of the advantages of this is that they're putting in place an Amazon-style ordering system. So if you have a damaged shirt or something and you need to replace it, you can go online, order the shirt, and then a few days later the shirt will turn up, or the number of shirts or whatever. But instead of having to order all your uniform in one lump, you can order your uniform throughout the year as and when you require it. We would certainly like any information from branches where members are suffering with uniform issues, if it's not coming through or anything else. I will say this, and Joe's raised this in the meetings that we've been at. Boots and shoes are PPE. All right, they're PPE. They're non-optional, they are PPE. So if your boots or shoes fall to pieces and they become unusable, then you are theoretically not permitted to go back to work because you do not have the correct PP for you to do it. So you need to bear that in mind. They have said that what they don't want is stocks of boots sat in a store where they can just go, so your establishment would have, say, 30 pairs of each size, because that's too wasteful, too costly. But what it means now is that you would have to go onto the internet, order a pair of boots, and then wait a couple of days for it to turn up. They have committed to the fact is that they will now provide next day delivery in cases of boots and shoes if you can't get to work because of it. Now, the Chair did mention about, I think it was Chair or Dave, mentioned about the uniform that we currently have. We're mandated by conference, by you guys, to maintain a black and white uniform. But the reality is, in the establishments I've been around and everything, including my own, that we have people wearing polo shirts of all sorts of different colours and everything else. Sometimes walking into some establishments, it's like walking into an all sorts factory with all the different colours and meanings that, depending on what polo shirt you have. Most of these have been locally purchased by your governors, so it's coming out of your governor's budget, not out of the uniform budget. It's coming out of the local budget. But I think now, the conference next year, there may be a decision. We'll be looking for a decision from conference as to whether black and white is still the required uniform from the members, or whether we should be looking at an alternative, and a softer uniform or not. That decision will come from you. You made the decision that we will remain black and white. We're in negotiations saying it will stay as black and white, but at the same time, we recognise that there are many establishments who are wearing polo shirts and that sort of stuff. So I imagine that soon, by the next conference, we'll be coming for a decision from conference whether that is what we still want or not. Because sometimes it can feel that we're arguing for something that our members may not necessarily want. Which brings me on to the next thing, utility vests. Yet again, mandated by conference to seek utility vests because of the weight load of our equipment that we're carrying. Now, Joe actually showed me at the start of this morning, today, a reply for a parliamentary question that was raised about utility vests and the use of utility vests. And the reply was quite clear on the basis that specialised members of staff will be wearing utility vests. Your dog teams, your NTRG, your DSTs and people like that. Prison officers will be given a utility belt in which they will carry the equipment that is now mandated to be required to be carried by them. On the reply, it actually turns around and says that it's calculated that the weight of the equipment you're required to carry is about 2.5 kilograms to maybe 3 kilograms. Well, when we first started raising this, Jeff, thank you very much, got a hold of a utility belt from one of his establishments and we weighed it and it came out of 5.5 kilograms. With all the stuff that you are mandated to require in most establishments, it comes to about 5.5 kilograms. Now, nobody knows what the long-term effect of walking around for an 11-hour shift in your establishment 5 days a week will have on your body as time goes on and as time proceeds. I know this much. My body's got older as I've got older. My hips hurt, my knees hurt, my ankles hurt, and everything else hurts. Now, nobody knows whether that is because of the equipment I've been required to carry. But also, the fact is the equipment being carried in a suitable place for me to use in an emergency when I'm required to use it? The current system it's on your waist. Now, we have some very petite members of staff, male and female, and we have some very sort of like larger, like me, that we put it on there. So I can fit a little bit more equipment around my waist than some of the other staff who are a lot slimmer than I am. It makes it more difficult for them. Walking around the establishments, you see members of staff with belts, because the equipment they've got on them, the belt has to be so loose that they're walking around like gunslingers and everything else with a radio hanging down here rather than where it can be easily used. So we've raised the issue about utility vests. We've questioned the skeletal damage that it may be having on a long-term effect. It may not affect somebody 20 years old, 25 years old might think to themselves, it's nothing, and everything else. But every day, 7 days or 5 days a week, for 300 days a year, year after year after year, it will eventually start making an impact on them. And when they can no longer do CNR or anything else, the exit door will be widened, will well and truly be open for them. So, mandated by conference to seek utility vests. The question now is that HMPPS do not want you or I walking around in landings wearing a utility vest because of the image that portrays. It's too militaristic, it's too threatening, it's too much in the face and everything else. And to a degree, we recognise that as a part. So we've moved our stance slightly, and that is to looking at equipment carrying systems that may be more suitable for us when we're carrying the equipment that we require. It may mean our uniform gets adjusted so to enable us to have the radio in the right place, your body-worn video camera in the right place, PAVA and everything else. So it's not just utility vests, it's also an equipment carrying system that would be suitable. Those negotiations are ongoing. We've sent information out to people saying, because they've assured us, if you have a musculoskeletal issue, and OH have actually said some of it is because of the equipment that you are carrying, then your employer will provide you with a utility vest. And allegedly, there are 1,000 of them in warehouse somewhere. But we've yet to find any member of staff who is not in DST, a dog handler, or anything, one of the other specialist roles, who's actually wearing a utility vest as an adjustment for the issues that they have on their bodies. So if you've got members like that, please email us and give us that information, because we've sent the request out. Is there anybody? We've had no answer back, which says to us there isn't. Okay, RMP, I've got to mention the RMP. Regime Management Plan was a plan and a policy that was brought in place built around safety. Up until this point, safety is very much a perception, an individual's perception. What I perceive to be unsafe, you may perceive to be safe. And another person may perceive it to be something else. There was no way of actually measuring it. So when you were challenging your governors about running an unsafe regime or anything else, there was nothing in place to say that the governor was correct and you were wrong, or you were right and the governor was wrong. We've gone through years where we're actually living in hope that nothing goes wrong, and that if it does go wrong, that we've got sufficient staff and ability to deal with that situation. Do you know what? We've kind of got away with it year after year after year, but it's not the same as saying we will always get away with it. The trouble is with health and safety is when it goes seriously wrong, at the end of it is a casualty suffering severe consequences of that failure. So to provide an assurance that our establishments are running safe, the Regime Management Plan was brought in. Ian was very much a part of the process on that one. As we went through the pandemic, RMPs fell out because basically we locked our prisons up. We locked all our prisoners up and everything else. So they needed readjustments. We had recovery management plans, and now we've got exceptional recovery management plans and everything else. It's your guys' responsibility to ensure that your RMPs, ERMPs or RRMPs, whatever you're running, is up and safe for you to do, because this is the only evidence you have to actually support your members, or a member has, if a member takes the decision under their own health and safety, they're going to put themselves in a place of safety. This is the document that will save those staff. So please make sure you have a compliant RMP in place. As we go down through COVID and everything else, and we've been involved right from the outset, as Richard has said, and I must admit, the negotiations between both sides have been brilliant. We've listened to each other, we've compromised in certain places, and they've compromised, we've compromised to make sure that things are as safe as they possibly can be. But as they started to go through stage 4, 3, 2 and 1 and progress down sort of stuff, that's when fears started to come into place because is it now safe for us to do this? I think there's only about 3 or 4 prisons that are currently in stage 3, and there's about 21 prisons that are in stage 1, and the rest of us are all in stage 2. Now, I'll be honest, from ministers and people like that, we're not progressing fast enough as a service to get into some sort of normality. We made it quite plain and clear to HMPPS, we are not going back to pre-COVID situations. And in honesty, Richard and everybody else has given us the same assurance they do not want to go back to where we came from. The pandemic gave the service the golden apple. And that was the fact is, because for years, absolutely years, decades, we've been saying to people, to governors, it's not safe, lock your prison down, lock your prison down. And the replies that we keep getting is, well, it's your members that have got to unlock these prisoners once we've locked them up. And there was an absolute fear if you locked a prison down for any length of time. And that was always being used as an argument. It's not safe, it's not safe, it's not safe. Pandemic came along, government made the decision, locked the country down, and HMPPS locked our prisons down. Not one prison riot, not one. When Italy locked their prisons down, I think 21 establishments had suffered with riots. Not one in England or Wales, or Scotland or Northern Ireland. So what it did do, it gave us the opportunity to take control back of our prisons that we'd lost over years and years and years. We've got that control back, and that is evidenced by the safety figures that have been coming out from HMPPS. Self-inflicted deaths, were really low. They're starting to climb now. I'll be admitted it is starting to climb. Natural death, causes of natural deaths have risen, but self-harm, because they turned around and said, our landings will be awash with blood as prisoners cut themselves up and everything else. Self-harm has dropped quite significantly. Prisoner-on-prisoner assaults have dropped quite significantly, and prisoner-on-staff results have dropped significantly. They're starting to rise now. They are starting to rise. There is nothing we can do from this table that will stop that from rising. The only people that can stop that from happening is sat out there with you guys. All right? You need to be aware of what's happening in your establishments. You have the rights to see the Viper reports. You have the rights to see the safety figures and everything else, and you should be negotiating and talking to your governor about them every month. If it's starting to rise, and you notice that the rise is starting as we start to lengthen the leash, for want of a better description, as we release control of our prisons at the moment. The difference between stage 2 and stage 1 is there's a reduction in COVID mitigations. Maybe the face mask, social distancing, hand washing and everything else remains in place. That's the only difference between stage 2 and stage 1. It's not about you going into stage 1 on Monday morning that you're suddenly unlocking greater numbers of prisoners. That we're now having greater numbers of prisoners out on association for whatever it is. That we're suddenly going to go back to playing ping pong and pool and everything else. It's quite clear when you read the stuff that's being sent out to you. Please read it. Structured activity. All right, structured activity. You've got to have domestics, without a doubt, showers, telephone calls, exercise, but everything else must be structured activity. In other words, it is planned and there is it's been supervised and there is an objective to it. It's not about unlocking 120 prisoners for 2 hours and letting them walk around the landings, because that's where we were before pre-COVID. When we were there, violence and everything else was spiralling through the ceiling, and there was absolutely no way of controlling it. So, as you move from stage 2 to stage 1, take that into mind about it. You have to be consulted as part of that process. Make sure you are consulted. If you're not, you need to get in touch with your NEC rep so we can actually put a halt on it and get some common sense brought into it. Ceramics and razors, you know about this and everything else. The chair mentioned about ceramic razors. Nobody at this top table has forgotten how hard it is working on a landing. May not have been there for a few years, but we haven't forgotten how hard it is. And we also haven't forgotten how awkward it is to do a one-for-one swap with a razor and everything else. As the chair said, they've run a pilot where they got rid of all the razor blades, all the razors, and they issued battery or electric razors to use. It worked. Unfortunately, it's costly. Because it's costly, HMPPS and the Treasury don't want to do it. Our position is we don't care how much it costs. It makes us safe. Everybody's aware of the staff that we've had this past year that have actually been maimed for life. You know, they actually got scarred for life because of razor blades and everything else. It's not acceptable. It should never, ever be acceptable. HMPPS obviously kicking their heels over this. They don't want it, you know, and everything else because of the cost, because of the alleged decency side of this. But the fact is that, and some of your canteens will still be, the prisoner will still be allowed to purchase razors on your canteen. The directive from HMPPS was quite clear. Every establishment must have a risk assessment and a safe operating procedure for the control of the issue of razors and razor blades. Go back to your establishments and ask to see those risk assessments and safe controls. Not just to ask about it, but you need to be walking around ensuring your members are actually applying those processes. But the managers of the establishment should be walking around and observing the process for the issue of a razor. Because if we can't actually get everybody an electric razor, the next best alternative must be a controlled system. Not somebody walks up, asks for a razor blade, and the officer reaches down, pulls 4 or 5 out and gives it to the prisoner, and he walks off. Because that is what has been happening over many, many years. It is difficult and everything else, but it has to happen. We're at the beginning of winter. UK is recognised as running hot. I think it's one of the only countries in Europe that is recognised as running hot. COVID infection rate last week beat 40,000 a day. It's dropped down to about 37, 35 this week, I believe. The number of deaths last week were in excess of 200 a day. That's dropped down to about 140 odd this week, and everything else. Yep. When they check the system as to why when it's safe for you to move, remember when the country moved, it was built on the back of the vaccinations. I'm not sure, but I would say less than 10% of our prisons have breached 50% fully vaccinated prisoners. And yet it's being used to actually say it's now safe for us to go. Just before I finish, there's one last thing I want to mention, and that's the fitness test. Fitness test ain't going away. We're trying, we're mandated, we are trying as hard as we possibly can. However, in the meantime, we've been in discussions about the fitness test. We're challenging the equality of the fitness tests. We're asking them for the equality assessments and everything else to support the fact that it is legislatively equal and everything else. But bearing in mind that we're now going to be working a lot longer, but also there's a lot recently over the past year about the menopause. And the menopause is not restricted to females. It is not restricted to females of middle age and above. It affects females from teenager all the way through and everything else. And it also affects the male, by the way. It can also affect men. And if you are suffering with the menopause or going through the symptoms of the menopause and everything else, it makes it more difficult for you to actually get through your fitness tests. They're now putting some adjustments in place that the fitness tester will look to maybe delaying it so for up to 6 months to allow the person to get through the issues that they have. But we're fighting for that one on the time. Please ensure you have a health and safety rep in your branch. All right, you've got to get out there. You would need a health and safety rep to do a lot of the work for you. But please, the TUC have recognised that there are a lack of female health and safety reps. Try and get around the female staff and ask them whether they want to be a health and safety rep. There are TUC courses which are paid for and facility time is being given for them to do this work. You must have a health and safety rep to fight the health and safety issues. And very, very finally, I'd like to place on record my sincere thanks and the committee's sincere thanks to Debbie Davies for the administrative work that she's been given to the committee over the years. Debbie's now been redeployed. She's now in charge of membership, and Helen has now taken over the administrative side of the health and safety. But just from Debbie, her work and dedication has been absolutely outstanding. Thank you, conference. Thank you.